Я приветствую вас, дорогие друзья.
Hello, dear friends, guests, and subscribers to the channel of mine and of Alexey. This is our joint stream. Alexey, glad to have you here. Good evening. Thank you, dear friends, for those who found time to watch us live during the original broadcast, and for knowing how to circumnavigate all the different troubles that Ukraine is putting in the way of its citizens who are in Ukraine to watch these streams. And if you do want to have a question answered, do not forget to scan the code on the left side of the screen and ask this question under my stream. On the right side of the screen, there is a QR code for Alexey's School of Thought. So if you want to take a class there, you're welcome. At the end of the stream, we will dedicate some time to answering the questions that we received during the stream, during the chat, and also to the questions that were sent to us beforehand. And I have a suggestion. In order for it to be more entertaining during the entire stream, I want to start it with a poll. Do you trust Zelensky? And the answers are yes, no, there's nobody else to. And the fourth is, I'm not Ukrainian, and I'm glad for that. So please vote. Today we will touch upon fresh sociology that was published in Ukraine. Even Knies, that was publishing a lot of percentage of trust to Zelensky, revealed that that percentage dropped by 10% at least, even in their poll. Zelensky himself is in Vienna. And let's start with that. Actually, before we go to Zelensky, let's look at the Iran and Israel. Everybody is commenting the events like if it was a soccer match, who's rooting for which team. And right before we went online today, there was the hottest notion from Netanyahu that just went in the Twitter webs saying that they will be targeting Ayatollah. And in Security Council, it is treated as self-defense, even though we can see that one country is attacking another country. What do you think are the future possibilities for the region? Because it is starting to influence other countries in the area and in the world. And many people do compare Russian-Ukraine war with Iran and Israel. All right. Alexander, let's start. So the main aid to both Ukraine and Israel are United States. Right before Israel operation, United States transferred 20,000 of missiles used to shoot down ballistics and drones from Ukraine to Israel. So we can understand their priorities. Israel is getting 100 UAVs heading to it, and several countries are taking part in shooting it down. Ukraine gets 400 UAVs from Moscow, and it's just us shooting them. So definitely there is more attention given to Iran and Israel conflict than ours here, and it's understandable, it's fresh. Ours is appearing to be more routine. But we also need to understand that Middle East is a much more attractive story for the United States than a peripheral war in the post-Soviet space somewhere in Ukraine. There is only one other region that is more important than Middle East, and that would be the Asian Pacific region. And if let's say something happens in Marshall Islands or near Taiwan, then all the attention of America will be tied to that region. And we definitely cannot compare do not equally compete for the attention of United States and the world in this conflict. And Iran was an ally of United States for a while. Now in 1979 there was a theocratic revolution, and Yoshenko, a Ukrainian commentator whom I respect a lot, he mentioned recently that Iran is speech, army, and faith brought to the extreme. And this is the model that is currently getting slammed by Israel. They declared the main goal of their political regime is to destroy the country of Israel. And after having announced that officially, adding that to documents, then whatever Israel would do with Iran and their political leadership is technically the act of self-defense. So one can say Iran was mad, or perhaps very brave, to make such a preemptive statement. If you declare that you're going to destroy me, then all of my actions against you later is self-defense. I did not declare that I'll kill you, you did. So this is going back to the matter of being careful in formulating your statements. When Ukraine slapped into their constitution that they're joining EU and NATO, Russians started to treat any actions of theirs against Ukraine as self-defense, because they are still pissed about NATO expansion to the east, regardless of 5 notes and warnings, and they do treat NATO encroachment onto ex-USSR territories as attacks on Russia. So Ukraine, one can say, in this regard, gave an option for Russia to present, to wrap every action they take against Ukraine as self-defense. And the difference here is in that Israel can fight a type of warfare that is inaccessible to Ukraine. Even Iran can fight a type of war that's inaccessible for Ukraine so far. Iran created at least 5 or 6, depending how you count, proxy armies, from Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad to Houthis. They're all funded by Iran, targeting that all of these different forces will be pulling Israel apart and they will be too busy to deal with Iran itself. Also, Israel was held down by Europeans and Americans in their aspirations to destroy the nuclear program of Iran, because Iran has a complex system of dependencies, mutual dependencies with China, and anybody who is supporting attacks on Iran and not peaceful negotiations with them is going to strain their relations with China, which nobody in Europe or United States wanted to do too early. Plus, there is also Russia somewhere on the horizon there. So Israel goes ahead and attacks Iran. Some people are asking question whether Trump was aware. Trump comes out and says, I was celebrating a birthday. I was not focused on this issue, but obviously he was made aware. Because usual Iranian answer to attacks of Israel is, among other things, to attack American military installations in the Middle East. So Israel would have warned America that they do have some threats brooding against them in the near future, and that's why Americans closed their embassies, warned Department of State warned the tourists about escalations, possible escalations in the region. So of course they knew. Now, from the technical side, Israel is targeting liquidation of a nuclear program because Iran quite clearly connects the idea of building nuclear weapons with the idea of destroying Israel. And Israel already reported that they've hit hundreds of targets. And we start seeing interesting signs accumulating. Israeli forces attack the Guards of Islamic Revolution headquarters. This is something like NKVD during the Stalin times, or enforcement troops personally under command of, or like National Guard under command of Ayatollah. And they take a certain portion in gray economy of Iran, in export and import operations outside of military functions. So they're basically the armed right wing of Ayatollahs. And we can understand when Israel is attacking air defense of Iran, or they attack the Guards of Islamic Revolution headquarters, that's understandable. But they also attacked the Department of Persecuting of Internal Opposition in Iran. Not necessarily directly related to Israel, right? Second, they also attack the center that is tracking all the CCTV cameras in Iran. And they were using that to record those people who are not wearing hijabs, who are violating traffic rules. And this building, this facility is now destroyed as well. So in Iran, it's a difficult situation because Persians are either a very minimal majority of the country or even a minority, because northeast and the Azerbaijan border is very Azerbaijani, In Iran, Azerbaijan, there are at least between 17 and 30 million of Azerbaijani living in Iran. So most of Azerbaijan, one can say, lives in Iran. And also in the south, they have other ethnicities. So, including the fact that Persians have very complex relations with their authorities. During the recent years, we've been witnesses that they had several revolts. Some of them lasted for weeks, and some of them were teetering on the brink. People were thinking that perhaps Ayatollah regime will fall. And many of them were ignited by relatively small facts when they started to prosecute a woman for taking off the hijab and such. And by the way, these people remember that their mothers were wearing miniskirts back in the Shah times in Iran. So there is definitely a resistance brewing there. Twice in 5 years, Ayatollahs had to suppress a major uprising. And now we have Ayatollah Khamenei, who is in his 85 years old, and some people are saying he's not necessarily in good health. So Israel now puts crosshairs on him. If you notice that they did not record Iranian president as the legit target, they separate theocratic structure from the civilian structure. And therefore Israel is attacking all those departments that are tracking the resistance, tracking the insurrection in Iran. So one can treat that this is an invitation from Israel to start another uprising against the Ayatollah regime in Iran. Iranian opposition is telling Israel that 3/4 of city population are hating Ayatollah's regime and are ready to throw them off, to topple them, given a chance. So Israel is not only attacking nuclear program, but they're also provoking an internal uprising or creating conditions for it to be successful. But we'll see how successful it'll be, but there are definitely some notes, some things to look at, because there could be a global vector to actually liquidate the power of Ayatollahs in Iran. We also see that Israel is not really destroying the full infrastructure objects of Iran. Yes, they hit some energy objects, some refineries, but they have not destroyed their export ports, seaports, because if you destroy that, the economy of Iran will probably crumble. So they try to separate clerical leadership of Iran and clerical infrastructure and authoritarian infrastructure in Iran from the civilian structures. About 40 years ago, Israel did not have a better ally in the Middle East than Iran, led by Shah. They had a very good friendship back then. So perhaps they're leading it to liberating Iran from the power of Ayatollahs. That would be a global reforming of that situation. Again, the descendant of Shah still lives in London. The whole picture can be restored pretty easily, given that there could be some success on the ground in Iran. So potentially there are leaders, and there is a structure that exists without Ayatollahs, even the army, the president of Iran, the parliament, and there is a lot of people, a big group of people, the middle class city population of Iran, that can also participate in resisting Ayatollah's regime and toppling it. So we don't know yet if Israel is going to crush Ayatollah's regime in Iran. They have enough agents, I reckon, in this country, so they probably have enough ways to supply support to insurgents to maintain the revolt. All right, Alexey, thank you. But let's go back to our topic here, and I think the main and the most important question in relation to Russian and Ukrainian conflict through the prism of Middle East conflict in the way that you described it now. Let's perhaps take a look at, and we understand that Israel is taking a lot of risk with these actions against Iran. Perhaps during our stream there'll be some more events happening. We have got notes that more missiles are flying. There could be more hits on Israel. Obviously, Iran will try to hit Tel Aviv. Not sure about Ayatollah. That was only mentioned today by Netanyahu, but there was a good hit on the TV and radio center where actually 16, according to Iranian media, people died. and it was done live on air while they were streaming, while they had their newscasts, so you could see these events. Israel is behaving very crudely, very aggressively against Iran. So if we look at the missile volleys against Israel from Iran, we heard that the first volleys were done with the more older type missiles, not the newest ones. Now they're starting to use some new models in the next volleys, and Israel is missing some of these ones coming in. So how much do you think the aerial warfare component can compensate their aspirations, can help Iran to destroy and crumble Israel? Do you think they can rely on their aerial attack in Iran to destroy Israel? Okay, Alexander, they're writing a lot about the casualties, and all. There are even reports of a whole Ukrainian family dying in one of these attacks there. If you look at the numbers, they have 300 plus launchers in Iran, 120 already destroyed. The preliminary estimate was that they had about 2,000 missiles to launch towards Israel. About 1/6 of them is already launched. 370 already launched. When they tried to make another volley yesterday, over 20 launchers were destroyed at the attempt to send their missiles, because Israel already controls aerial space over Iran to a large degree, and when you have active air force flying over your head, it's difficult to create these successful launches. So they have to move, they have to do it at night, they have to do it undercover. They also have to move to the center of Iran for better protection, so they are becoming further away from the border, from Israel, so the accuracy starts to lack. And Israel is quite controlling their airspace. Now, in Israel, there were attacks on the Ministry of Defense, and Israel was ready, they were prepared. They're doing their own operations internally in Israel to provide for safety of civilians and military personnel. Therefore, I did not see a successful opportunity for Iran to destroy anything in Israel significantly. Yes, they'll make attempts, but I do not see them succeeding much. There are two other key points here. Whether the United States will decide to join this operation. For now, they're playing good cop, bad cop. Israel is bombing Iran, and Trump comes out and says, well, guys, let's sit down at the table and discuss. Putin is eager to represent Iran at the negotiations, and we can facilitate the negotiations as well. And if Americans decide to join Israel, they have capabilities that even Israel doesn't have. Specifically, they have technical capabilities to destroy bunkers and deeper buried objects. Then Iran will definitely feel the wrath. And then there'll be way more effective terms created for the replacement of Ayatollah's regime if Americans decide to intervene. Second is that China and Pakistan are not completely asleep. Iran is the main supplier of oil to Pakistan and China, and they are in some sort of political union. There are definitely some relations between these countries. There is also a Silk Way going in that area, and Pakistan and China are nuclear powers. So already you can find some mentions in media that China is starting supplying Iran with some military equipment. So that's another question. What will Iran get if they do? Will they be able to launch anything towards Israel? And that's one side of a story. What if they get some air defense from Pakistan? F-16s, F-15s that Pakistan has. What if they start covering certain objects on the Iran territory from Israeli attacks? So this is a rather a powder keg. And another, the role of India in this conflict. So far, we can only measure how many missile strikes did both sides exchange, but there is a potential in this war to grow to, if not the Third World War, but to something like 2.5 World War, where at least 3 nuclear powers will be in juxtaposition: Israel, Pakistan, and China. Alexey, thank you for this look, for this angle. Dear viewers, do not forget to click subscribe and like button while you're listening to us and watching us. There are a couple clarifying questions I want to ask here. First is whether there is any opportunity for ground operations in this war. We mentioned Pakistan not for nothing. In Iraq, there are definitely quite a few supporters of Iran. So, in the same fashion as Israel is trying to destroy Iran politically, that regime, same thing in the neighboring Iraq that partially roots for Iran. Many of them, actually, and many other countries around Israel are also declaring Israeli strikes to be improper. They're requesting Israel to stop. And looking at all that, do you think there is a chance for this war to go in some land-based phase as a part of this big geopolitical game? Also, it's interesting to mention Tucker Carlson, who recently came out on TV in the United States and said that the war with Iran may lead to global failure for United States and stop being the global dominant. Okay, let's go in orderly fashion, Alexander. Even Iraq doesn't have a land-based border with Israel. The only way they can get to Israel is to walk through Syria. And Iraqi tank division even came on time to participate in the last few days of the war against Israel on the Golan Heights. So they would anyway have to go through Jordan or Syria. And I suspect that Israeli air defense will destroy any column if it decides to leave Iraq in the direction of Israel. Because there are very few powers in the Middle East that can resist Israeli Air Force, and it's only Pakistan and Turkey who can be of some significant resistance to Israel if they decide to. However, Turkey is not a friend of Iran regime, and Iran has threatened Azerbaijan, which is in good military relations with Turkey, so Turkey is not on Iran's side in this conflict. And one thing to conduct trade relations between Turkey and Iran, the other thing is military operations. There are very few, let's put it this way, there are very few reasons for Turkey to defend Iran. And by the way, a significant part of military preparation of Turkish military forces is to prepare for the war with Iran. This is their usual scenario for training. Now, regarding Iraq, over 60% of the population there are Shia Muslims. Sunni minority was ruling for a while, but most of Shia monuments or precious locations are not in Iran, they're in Iraq. So Shia is a minority, it's usually Azerbaijan and Iran. Sunnis are the rest, and they do have certain rivalry between two kinds of Islam, like Catholics and Protestants had before. So one thing is to attack Israel verbally for attacking Iran from other Arab countries, but the other thing is to actually start a war. So, in the reality, I think it's more interesting to see how Pakistan and China react to this war. Also, Israel has its own levers to use with Pakistan and with China. And still, we're coming back to key players in this conflict, which is United States, and of course, Russia and India on the horizon. First, if another axis of Pakistan, China, and some other Islamic country, let's take some Turkey as a fantasy, anti-Israel axis, that would imply that United States need to help Israel, and they would have to physically join this warfare. Otherwise, Israel will have significant troubles trying to win this conflict. And whom do they fight with, right? So if United States decide not to intervene or significantly support Israel with some international coalition with Saudi Arabia, maybe Jordan, even though that would be problematic too, then Israel stays alone against all that. and the United States would be losing the remnants of its authority as the country incapable to defend their allies. And if the United States go into direct military conflict, that can add a lot of potentially players from the global south to the axis of Iran and its supporters. Very murky, very blurry perspectives in this angle, but here India, China, Pakistan will have to make a decision. Because if China and Pakistan align themselves with Iran, India will probably not join them. And that may lead to another escalation in this conflict, because this is a very hot region full of different contradictions. However, it could be alternatively, a very weak war with 2 years of aerial attacks and some jet engines flying over Iran and hitting targets there. But it's definitely an interesting situation worth keeping a close eye on. All right, dear listeners, we definitely will continue monitoring the development of this situation. As Alexey outlined, there is a potential to change the world coming from this region. Remember Zhirinovsky, that Russian politician who was predicting a lot of things in the Middle East back when he was alive and when he was active. Okay, I can tell you more about Zhirinovsky, by the way, Alexander, if you like. Sure, I would. So, in Soviet Union, unlike independent Ukraine, intelligence services worked not only on the strategic level, but also on tactical and operative levels. The districts that had actual active operative agents and the right to get agents across the border were in Karpaty district and also in south of Soviet Union with headquarters in Tbilisi, Georgia. Captain Zhirinovsky was one of the most prominent officers of the Intel Operative Department in the history of Soviet Union. He was working in the Caucasus district, he spoke perfect Turkish, and he even managed in the 80s to work on the territory of Turkey. If I remember, that's where his good connections with Grey Wolves come from, because he worked with this organization closely and had significant authority with them. His geopolitical thinking was very sharp, and being an intelligence operative, you always work on both fronts. You work as an analyst, you work as an agent, as a recruiter. And now, a few years after his death, some of his predictions start to come true, and people declare him to be a prophet in certain things with huge insights. But this is not some prophecy. This is just a show that captains of Soviet Union counter-intel operations and intel operations were very well trained, especially if they had any personal talent. The second figure of that caliber, who also in 10 or 12 years grew from lieutenant to colonel, that was a nonsense for Soviet army, was an ex-Belarus prime minister who was also found deceased during a visit to Middle East. He came to serve in Karpaty district with a headquarters in Lviv, and then he worked in Odessa. Also Odessa district was pretty strong in this capacity. So that system actually produced quite a few significant persons and specialists. And all of his characteristics were in superlative tones. All right, Alexey, let's put a bridge here to the events in Ukraine. Today, Zelensky went to Vienna in Austria, somewhat in a tabloid fashion, but it didn't start pretty. There were two meetings, relatively small. One meeting was for Ukraine, another against Ukraine, and unprecedented events, unprecedented effort were spared by Austria to prevent anything from outbursts. The level of security was fantastic. Even when Trump was visiting Austria in his first cadence, they did not provide so much protection and so much control of the city. So the center of the town was, the center of Vienna was blocked, but there were several less picturesque moments during it. And this picture went throughout the media in the world with the video that where he jumps out of the car, runs, congratulates everybody, and then shakes hands. And yeah, the rain is going, presidents are being protected with an umbrella, while first ladies are not made of sugar and nobody cares about putting an umbrella over them. So during this visit, Zelensky makes two statements I want you to comment about. First is that he says Ukraine is eager to buy military aid from Trump. So basically underlining that when Hegseth came out recently saying that there'll be no help from United States, that Europe will have to supply Ukraine now. So he's basically asking America to sell if they do not want to transfer. And second is that Zelensky also requested Austria to give to Ukraine not so much the runaway oligarchs, but their assets, if they can. So that visit was very short, and after that, Zelensky left for G7. So if we are to judge that Viennese waltz of Zelensky, what these meetings and these motions can tell us about? This was a strange visit indeed. The level of Austrian-Ukrainian relations is historically low. I think somewhere in Austrian press, there were about 4,500 requests from Ukraine to extradite Ukrainian citizens from Austria to Ukraine. But Austria is one of the countries in the European Union that never gives anybody out. They did not, by the way, give Firtash to American prosecution system, which has more requests and probably more weight than Zelensky administration. So that's about that. Now, regarding purchasing military equipment, perhaps there is that angle in Zelensky's office that perhaps Trump just doesn't understand anything in global politics, so let us just buy stuff from him. You're not supplying us directly, but look, we can buy it from you. At the same time, if he refuses to, they want to catch him on his rhetoric and say, listen, he's not supporting us, not even selling to us, he's not even for our cause. And perhaps try to attack Trump and his election base in regards that, listen, if you are selling equipment and you're creating new jobs in states, that's one thing. But if you're refusing to sell, you're also not creating new jobs in states. It's a long, weird suggestion from Zelensky's side, a long play. But again, this is awkward because all these questions can be solved quietly. Yermak was in Washington for quite a while recently. You could have negotiated anything you want. Now, as for giving up the oligarchs, it's funny asking that from Austria. They never give anybody out. And this is an unknown signal into nowhere. Zelensky definitely was expecting that answer from Austria, so he's working probably for his own image as the fighter with oligarchy for Ukrainian media. So these two statements are designed to pump up his somewhat fading image, mostly internally, which do not have long legs to continue into the long politics or become anything real. This is just PR, body motions, just like most of his public statements. And it's, it's not interesting to comment on this. Everything is pretty clear. Okay, in a press briefing, Zelensky also made a statement that Russians suggested to exchange Ukrainian kids for Russian prisoners of war. And that was published the day when the process of transfer of the bodies of soldiers concluded between two countries. There were some calculations. The Russian side already announced how much they sent. They sent 6,500 bodies, and 78 supposedly were returned back. So we see how anti-crisis measures are being turned on in the Ukrainian government that are very reminiscent for me as some sort of a vulture mechanism when Minister of Defense Klimenko is starting to say that some bodies be returned because there was a mixture of non-Ukrainian bodies in there. And in the marathon, on the TV marathon, they start explaining to people in Ukraine that Russians have a significant task for us to be upset about this transfer, that we would come to a third Maidan and topple the Zelensky government. And they're basically saying that they take one person, put him in different bags, and count them as several bodies. And they're also saying that you know why there are so many bodies that they're transferring, because they were digging through the graves on the occupied territories for this PR action. These are not the bodies recovered on the battlefront, so people do not be concerned, do not be upset. This is just Russian PR. So such a cannibalistic antichrist measures is awkward, right? The topic is painful. 6,050 actually was the number, not 6,500. And that's a lot of bodies. And Russia is also promising to transfer some more. That appears to be the most painful hit on Bankovая Street on the president of Ukraine. No, Alexander, this is not the main hit. Now, why Russia has more bodies of our troops than we gave them back? We gave them under 100. They gave us 6,000. Simple, because the army that is attacking is taking the territories, so most of the bodies on those territories are on their territory, occupied territory now. For us, it's more difficult because we're the withdrawing army who's leaving territories, and it's difficult for us to gather anything from the front. So this is the simple, basic explanation. So there are some reporters talking that, well, if Russians return us 6,000 and we can only give them back 78, that means that this is how many of ours die versus theirs. No, this is not true. Russians occupied a village, for example, but the bodies are all there in that village, right? So they have custody of that since we left the territory. And also, when Ukrainian troops are retreating, do you think they care about picking up the bodies of Russians? So this is pretty clear. Now, about that cannibalistic approach, as you call it, back in 2014, I recorded a video that was called "A Cherry Martida." I would remind that according to Freud, there are two powers driving person, libido and martida. Libido is not just sexual. It could be a desire to live, desire to create, and martido is a desire to die, which is also present in human conscience. The Ukrainian insurgency army dugout is a typical martida-driven culture. The center of Kiev is turned into a cemetery, an external celebration of losses, the continuous whining, continuous kneeling in front of the dead who didn't get fined. Dead, 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 cemetery, 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 deceased, deceased, deceased. So this project, in my view, cannot live long. It can die successfully, and its organic culture is celebrating the cult of death. I can bring you two significant factors. How much that attitude celebrates the dead Russians, and how much attention is invested in the dead Ukrainians. So Russians looked at that, and I think they figured out that they can capitalize on it. Since you have the cult of death, okay, here you go. Here's 6,000 of your bodies. And here we get this cannibalistic drum beatings. I cannot call it anything else. Ukrainian authorities do not communicate properly. The right strategic communication in this case would be to come out and explain to your people, to your army, to each soldier who is alive today can become that body tomorrow, about which all these huff and puff is about. And just explain to everybody who wants to listen why Russia is taking this action from your point of view. It has to be logically proven story. And second, whether you will accept, on what terms and why you're accepting, and why you're not accepting, if you're not, or accepting only partially, and what is the logic behind it. And third is, when you accept it, you create a certain procedural form where you distinguish and verify the soldiers, honor them, transfer their bodies to families for burial, and make the payments for the lost soldiers. And that goes back to the budget, which has no money, because that goes into billions for 6,000 soldiers. And this is a different story. Here is the bodies of our fallen. Here is the genetic expertise. Here we transfer that to the families. They get the proper burial with honors, and these are the payments to the families. Of course, Ukraine cannot find 90 billion in its budget currently, but this is the plan. This is how we are planning to pay the families. What it turns into, instead, just like you outlined, well, the bodies are wrong, we're returning some, Russians are bluffing, it is not right. This is, again, another circus on the prisoners, on the dead soldiers of this war. And there was even some blowback from the previous stream about my energy speech, right? Look at me today. I'm just very calm today. I'm not steaming today. I'm just putting facts in front of our audience. And I'm addressing the group that attacked me after the previous stream, despite the fact that most people actually supported me. There was a huge support and outpour from the Western Ukraine, from Ukrainian immigrants to support me. And most of them, actually in the Western Ukraine, they came out and said that all these professional patriots of Ukraine, we're tired of them. They're pushing topics we do not agree with. So I have a question to an audience. Do not like me, that's fine. You can hate me, that's okay. That keeps me in shape. Ask yourself, what do you think about this story, about the bodies of our defenders? Try to explain it to yourself. And I will also drop you 3 more facts to think about, just on this week, just in the last couple of days. Lobanovsky is not a patriot. Verka Serduchka character, Andrei Danilka, creator, is not a patriot. And something was stolen again on Sumy district, the city that is 17 kilometers away from the front line. So let's, support this power together? This is Ukrainian authority together again? Is that what I should say? Just support the Zelensky power and trust them? No fortifications. The bodies are not being properly received and treated. And absolutely circus-like central signal coming out without any explanations that starts to devour their own. Lobanovsky was the honor and the pride of Ukraine. Verka Serduchka and the character that Sergei Danilka created became the quintessential Ukrainian character. He was gathering huge audiences in Russia, and he was the first one to refuse the concerts in Russia starting 2014 after the annexation of Crimea, even though he was crazy popular there. All right, let me interrupt you here, Alexey, for a sec. This is an important moment. I think this is the nerve of this current situation. You remembered our weekly conversation a week ago. And I think when you bring a mirror to a person, I think anybody can be hurt, right? By the looks, for example. You can look in the mirror, nose is not perfect, the ears are sticking out, the person can be not happy with it, but this is truth. And it may be rough. But the situation with Sergei Danilka and his Verka Serduchka character at his concerts, one thing is that he is mega popular in the world. Here, people were given a mirror to look at. There is a war. There are bodies being transferred. There are people dying on the front. And in Kievan closed club, they're eating, drinking, walking semi-naked with all these social influencers, drinking double whiskeys, dancing under all these songs. Who do you think gets the blowback? The song that he was performing on this special event, closed event, or are they upset at themselves that they were caught dancing and drinking? I think this is a story about psychology that civilians do not quite understand. Armed forces actually exist for the reason to give an opportunity for civilians to eat, procreate, work, and continue their normal lives. If military start crying that while we're dying here on the front, they there in the back do not even know that the war exists, that means that military are misunderstanding their main function. Their main function is to keep dying so that they could facilitate the life of people who are not on the front. This is the destiny of military, to die and defend those who are not on the front. Well, I was a couple days of my life a military, that didn't even come to my head to become a professionally upset person at those who are living their lives, living their normal civilian lives while we are fighting the war. This is obvious. You are here in the trench to make sure to give them a chance to be normal. But maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I'm understanding something wrong. And maybe in this season, it's required to suffer more. But I can tell you something else, that there is, for example, a person, Pavel Shelin. Sometimes you even bring him to your streams, and he produced an interesting thought. He's saying that politically organized Ukrainianism is agnostic sect. And as every agnostic sect, it lives according to the principle of Duncan MacLeod, the Highlander. Only one remains standing. See, recently they were chasing those who are speaking Russian, so you and I became the enemies of this regime. Now they're starting to devour the quintessential essence of this regime, the ones that were presenting Ukraine. And tomorrow they'll start devouring each other. And they'll probably start doing it in all the weird ways, including exchanging grenades in the vehicles. Because all these Gnostic sects, they basically copy Satan. Satan always has to remain alone and lock the whole love of the world to himself, onto himself. Human only goes for future evolution and expansion when they understand that they exist for a higher meaning than themselves. And here there is another uncomfortable question. I don't like bring every stream to that uncomfortable manner. I want to talk about Iraq, Iran, I like talking about the front, but it would be dishonest intellectually if I did not bring it to one essential question. Because thinking process in its pure form is going from different thoughts to ultimately, essentially, hopefully one single thought at the end. So political Ukrainianism does not have an idea above itself. It serves only itself. Any organization, any consciousness, any collective that is just locked onto himself, itself, in the worst sense of this meaning, not in terms of protecting its borders, individuality, but in serving itself. It's doing nothing but pure Satanism. Pavel likes allegoric comparisons, where he calls it demon Avka, that is trading a sweet drug of unity. And he always talks about the story of Taras Bulba and Andrei, who for money and for a beautiful girl switched sides and went to the side where Poles promised to help, but they didn't. Today we do not need to bring all these metaphors into conversation, but we can just say that when 300 or 400 years span, Ukrainian leadership continuously failing, and during the last 100 years they failed 3 times, 1918, 1945, and now. What does it tell you when 3 times in the recent 100 years the system fails? Canonically, same mistakes. Corruption, eating your own. Corruption, eating your own. Change slogans, corruption, eating your own. Today there was an interesting publication in Ukrainian Pravda about why Ukrainian Liberation Army failed back in 1918. It was outlining the same things, corruption and devouring their own. What does it tell us about? For 400 years, these people failed to create their own governance. And the moment they obtain it, briefly, they lose it. One can note that Ukrainians, as components of other organizations, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Russian Empire, mostly Russian Empire, because Austro-Hungarian was not giving too much powers to Ukrainians, or Ukrainians who traveled to Canada, to United States, to Turkey. By the way, one of those soldiers raising a flag in Iwo Jima the American war with Japan, 1945. He's one of them as Ukrainian. They're showing outstanding results because the quality of Ukrainians as human material is very high. It is one of the most stubborn in a good way and in a bad way as well, one of the most creative peoples. But in the framework of typical Ukrainianism in Ukraine, they are as if their wings are being cut and the balls are being chopped. Lobanovsky, who is considered to be the matter of world soccer, he is written in the pantheon of the best soccer players. Andrei Danilka, a very deep composer, brilliant creator, who created a fantastic image of Verka Serduchka that represents the whole Ukraine of 1990s and early 2000s. He is bad now. Tomorrow, one district of Lviv will be fighting with the district of Ivano-Frankivsk, who is more Ukrainian, because Ukrainian insurgency army fought with itself quite a bit and continues to do so. This is the quality of Ukrainianism. And as any agnostic sect, they continue to killing each other till one of them remains. They will devour everybody, not just us, themselves included. That's why, Alexei, this is a very difficult story, because then I think there'll be only Russians left here. Right, this is a difficult story, Alexander. Bandera and Petliura directions, vectors, they are harmful for Ukraine. They always end in a bad place. The remnants who manage to run away, they write memoirs in Canada. The rest end up in a massive grave here in Ukraine. So how long do you think Ukraine can exist in this regime? It cannot exist as 1991 country, which was a unique country that inherited a lot of things from Soviet Union, and when the higher civilization, I hate to say that, but still, when they left, all these Yuzhmash and other high technological manufacturings start to fall down to its normal state of 18th century. And now we're looking at the same mode of public relations. Now, Ukraine, fighting a war with Russia, of course, drummed up Bandera as its national symbol, but Bandera is nobody for Odessa and for the eastern Ukraine and Dnieper. And even on the west of Ukraine, there are a lot of questions to him. So when near Babi Yar we have a thoroughfare called Bandera Street, and then we ask from Israel some help, this is a complex story, right? Something needs to be done about it if Ukraine wants to survive. What do we need to do, Alexei? The war needs to be stopped. Ukraine needs to be reestablished. This ideology, this Ukrainianism needs to be condemned on the government level, left maybe in the museums. And if we want Ukraine and Ukrainian culture to exist in some capacity, Ukrainian mythology, we need to make sure that we pressure this poison, this Bandera poison, out of our country daily, and continue separating clean Ukraine from rotten Ukraine. And since the central signal now, emitted by one fellow from Kryvyi Rog, regardless that he promised very different things to people electing him back in the day, he is now communicating to all these nationalistic aspirations in Ukraine that I'm just like you. Don't hit me too much. That, unfortunately, leaves us with a choice, whether we are building a future, a country with a future, or we're supporting Ukrainianism. And if we fail to, we will probably stop existing maybe in 10 or 15 years. For two simple reasons. This story does not produce anything, it only destroys. And second, Russia will also not tolerate such an organization or the country the size of that, or organization the size of that country. They will continue brushing it out. And this is definitely a way for us to lose more external allies with such an approach. We will be losing them, and what Ukraine can do without help. Look, Israel and Turkey, they understand the difference between wants and cans, and they never set political goals that exceeded their cans. And if they wanted something bigger, they were spending dozens of years to enlarge and increase their capacity to achieve that. And there is another way to fight. Slavic soul is very prone to that, by the way. Russia is prone to that too. It doesn't matter if I can, I won't. Let's run into battle, we'll figure it out on the way. That systemic Bandera regime for 30 years was doing it. At the beginning it was different. It slowly gravitated to that, to ignoring cans and then just going to wants. Who cares about what we want, right? And it ended with a culmination of adding NATO to our constitution, except for NATO didn't want us there. For 15 years, Putin was pushing Ukraine in a different direction, saying that this is the wrong vector. And that's where we are. Now, okay, that goddamn Putin attacked our country, right? We now have our nationalist part that is going to show us how to fight with oppressors. Well, unfortunately, they can only produce military contracts of 45% of what was ordered. And now we're hearing from the office of the president that these are not real nationalists. The real ones are fighting on the front, and these are bureaucrats that are just scoundrels and scumbags who do not understand the real meaning. Well, they're flesh of the flesh of this Zelensky administration. The core of this regime is not running in the Ukrainian shirt and fighting on the front. It's about using its own talent to get rich, and your position to get rich, and using corruption to get rich. They don't have any significant higher goal. The goal of business is optimize the profit. The goal of politician is to increase its symbolical capital. What symbolic capital does Banderas and Petliuras have? What are they about? People are calling themselves Christians, but they're saying Ukraine above all, Ukraine above God, Ukraine above church, Ukraine above ethic capital. What goals are you working for? For integrity of the Western districts? I can open some of my Instagram posts to show how many people from the West are telling me that they hate this projectivity, that they're so tired and fed up with this vector. So Western of Ukraine has a lot of good people. They're actually writing right now in the chat of this stream. This is a very narrow group of people who are abusing power and abusing this ideology of a complex, how some people even saying have fascistic regime of Pilsudski towards Ukraine, and who are trying to build this ideology for the 21st century. The country that is dismantling monuments, that is persecuting science and chasing not only Bulgakov and other authors from the yesteryear, but also current active figures of culture and science. There is no other political Ukrainianism possible. Political Ukrainianism is only working as such. It was always like this, and it was always failing, unfortunately. It is organically like this, because it does not have goals beyond personal and organizational petty ambitions. They cannot offer anything to Kharkov, to Odessa, to Mariupol, to Donetsk and Lugansk. They can't even suggest much to Ivano-Frankivsk. They do not have a picture of the future, continuous resentment and war with Russia with more dead bodies. We will all die, but we will not let the unity be dropped. Do you seriously want to live in the 21st century like this? The century when artificial intelligence is already expanding in other countries, where civilization is going to change its character in the next 5 years? What are you going to talk about with artificial intelligence? About Bandera? Tectonic and geopolitical processes are changing. New blocks and new unities are being formed among different countries of the world. What symbolic capital does Ukrainianism, do Banderites and Petliurites offer us? Reinventorize the bones of the holy symbols and of the first hour.